Thank you for that. Henrietta sends her apologies because there's an awful lot going on in the traditional owner space. There's a police conference next door, and also the Path to Treaty is being having a session there as well, so Henrietta's been involved with that. The title of the report that we did was Great Barrier Reef Indigenous Tourism, Translating Policy into Practice. And I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors, that's Chief Investigator Professor Henry Marrie, AM, and Kirsty Galloway-McLean. Just rearrange the furniture. The starting point of this report is that all tourism and events in Queensland take place on the traditional lands and sea country of identifiable traditional owners. There are at least 70 traditional owner groups with rights and interests in sea country along the length of the GBR, recognised by Gorimpa. More than half the Great Barrier Reef catchment is subject to formal Indigenous ownership, interests or co-management arrangements. Traditional owners along the GBR are therefore rights holders, not stakeholders, and should be respected as such by all tourism organisations and operators. I just want to briefly say a couple of words about the nature of the tourism market. Around 80% of the tourism activity actually occurs within 7% of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, with most coral reef focused tourism activity located in the Port Douglas, Cairns and Whitsundays. There are very few Indigenous tourism businesses that provide GBR experiences, and these are very much focused on the Cairns Port Douglas area. There is one operating from town of 770 Agnes Waters area and one in the Whitsundays. International tourists are generally more interested in Indigenous experiences than domestic travellers, with Cairns Port Douglas area the focus of that market. This is having particular consequences during the pandemic. The drive tourism market predominates in the tourism regions outside the Cairns Port Douglas and Whitsunday regions, and it's therefore fair to say that outside of these two regions, most of the GBR Indigenous tourism experiences are shore-based, focused on Indigenous community arts centres and activities such as camping, fishing and four-wheel drive tours and local festivals such as the Winds of Zidanthe in the Torres Strait and the Laura Aboriginal Dance Festival in Cape York. An important issue with regard to tourism, participation in the tourism industry, is the capacity of traditional owner groups to supply experiences, products and services to the Great Barrier Reef Indigenous tourism industry. Of the 43 TO landholding entities identified, which was 20 native title prescribed body corporates and 23 land trusts, very few have the capacity to engage in tourism activities. A quarter of these entities are small, have no employees and no income, and on this basis lack the capacity to fulfil their native title obligations, let alone contemplate engagement in the Great Barrier Reef tourism. Only about 5 were considered to have the capacity through their range of services to meaningfully engage in tourism. The report that we put together contains 9 recommendations, some of which are on hold because of COVID. And before I present the recommendations and their outcomes to date, I just want to focus on Queensland tourism policies, because that's the point of the whole exercise, is how tourism policies are then put into practice. While Tourism Australia identifies Aboriginal Australia as one of 7 signature Australian experience themes, in 2018, Tourism and Events Queensland, TWQ, stated its intention of making Queensland the country's #1 destination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experiences. This is to be achieved through a suite of Queensland tourism policies, which include Destination Success, the 20-year plan for Queensland tourism, that was published in 2014, which outlines a number of strategic directions, one of which is built on the theme, preserve our nature and culture through maximising the tourism opportunities of heritage, arts, culture and nature and Indigenous tourism experiences. Another important one was the Queensland Ecotourism Plan 2016-2020. Indigenous heritage is explicitly mentioned in the vision statement in which the Queensland Government's vision for ecotourism in Queensland is to be achieved by 2020. There's also the Queensland Tourism Workforce Plan 2017-20, Jobs Queensland. In response to this plan, the 13 regional tourism organisations around the state were responsible for drafting their individual 2018 tourism workforce plans, which specifically included recruitment and training strategies to engage more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in their workforces. There's also the Indigenous Participation Plan 2018-2021, released by the Queensland Department of Innovation and Tourism Industry Development, DITID, in 2018, which outlines how the department will contribute to the delivery of the Queensland Government's Reconciliation Action Plan 2018-2021. Goals include increasing accessibility for Indigenous peoples, allocating 3% of the Attracting Tourism Fund, Outback Tourism Infrastructure Fund, and Growing Tourism Infrastructure Fund to support Indigenous proponents. There's also the Best of Queensland Experiences program from 2017. The Guide to the Best of Tourism Queensland Experiences program serves as the basis for annual judging of Queensland's best experience providers. Tourism operators are scored out of 100 points against each of the following weighted criteria: consistent delivery of an exceptional experience, website with secure online booking platform, active and engaging social media presence, regional tourism organisation membership, and product experience accreditation. The significance of these criteria is that because they represent best practice industry standards, they are put forward as the standards that Indigenous tourism businesses should aspire to in order to consider themselves as being business ready. TWQ has also engaged in promoting Indigenous tourism through, for example, Connect with Culture, 50 Ways to Experience Indigenous Culture, and most recently promoting 2021 as the Year for Indigenous Tourism. That was supposed to be last year, but obviously COVID intervened. Now, if these policies and programs are faithfully implemented at the regional and local levels, I would suggest that we would have a far stronger and more diverse Indigenous participation in the tourism industry than we are currently experiencing. A great deal of the responsibility for implementing Queensland's tourism policies and programs, and for which they are largely funded, rests with regional tourism organisations, RTOs. For branding and destination marketing purposes, Queensland is divided into 13 tourism regions. The branding and marketing of the Great Barrier Reef tourism is largely carried out by 7 RTOs that are responsible for implementing marketing strategies to promote their regions as a travel destination. The 7 RTOs, whose regions include sections of the Great Barrier Reef from north to south, are Tourism Tropical North Queensland, Townsville Enterprise Limited, Tourism Whitsundays, Mackay Tourism, Capricorn Enterprise Limited, Gladstone Area Promotion and Development Limited, and Bundaberg North Burnett Tourism Limited. RTOs are membership-based, industry-funded, incorporated private companies, and as such, will largely reflect the attitudes and priorities of their members. They are not statutory bodies like Tourism and Events Queensland, and therefore have no statutory obligations to implement TWQ policies. However, they all partner with and receive significant funding from TWQ to develop and promote their Great Barrier Reef brands. They also receive funds from local councils in their region and support from a range of federal sources. They are, in effect, quasi-non-government organisations, or quangos. The role of the RTOs is considered important because they are primarily responsible for the development, management, promotion and marketing of the destination brand on behalf of their members, local councils and their regions more broadly. Without the brand endorsement of their products and the marketing savvy and global reach of the RTOs, Indigenous tourism businesses have a diminished chance of success, particularly in the digital age. RTOs have a critical role in meeting the overall objective of making Queensland the country's #1 destination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experiences. Not all RTOs have yet engaged significantly with Indigenous tourism business in their regions. However, those RTOs that have engaged have proven highly successful in supporting Indigenous tourism. For example, TWQ's Indigenous tourism brand was launched in 2018 as Timeless Experiences, with the tagline, sharing our rainforest, reef and rainforest stories. The brand's core proposition is visit us in our reef and rainforest country to deepen our connection with the world through the timeless wisdom of the world's oldest continuous living cultures. I just want to also make a couple of points about RTOs along the Great Barrier Reef. One concerns the inclusion of traditional owners in governance processes. Although I recognise the stakeholders within their regions, most RTOs do not specifically include traditional owners in the governance process, although one had a traditional owner place on the board of directors. However, most would consider a variety of options to improve participation, including traditional ownership participation at board level, traditional owner participation in executive management teams, and appointing an Indigenous champion or mentor. Another point is to do with market research. Few RTOs had commissioned market research to assess the level of demand for Indigenous tourism products or experiences within their region, and most did not have marketing strategies that specifically include Indigenous activities. However, the lack of Indigenous marketing strategies was strongly correlated with low levels of Indigenous tourism businesses in those regions. And another point is that concerning traditional owner awareness of RTOs, in our survey, less than 40% of the traditional owner respondents were aware that RTOs were responsible for their region. That included some respondents with established tourism businesses. However, the majority of traditional owners were interested in being more involved with their local RTO. The report provided 2 recommendations with regard to RTOs. Recommendation 8 was to provide for the RTOs to provide cross-cultural awareness training to all mainstream local tourism businesses. And another recommendation was to facilitate trust building, networking and partnering between traditional owners, regional tourism organisations and mainstream tourism operators. I just want to digress a little bit here. With regard to the 13 RTOs across the state, I want to foreshadow the likelihood of an institutional racism audit being conducted within the next few years. This would occur in response to Priority Reform 3, Transforming Government Organisations, of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, which came into force in July last year and binding on all levels of government. Is that a cricket? Oh, shit. Okay, the first of the transformational elements identified for Priority Reform 3 is to identify and eliminate racism, specifically to identify and call out institutional racism, discrimination and unconscious bias in order to address these experiences. Henrietta and myself developed a matrix for identifying, measuring and monitoring institutional racism, which was used as the auditing tool in a report I wrote for the Anti-Discrimination Commission Queensland in 2017, addressing institutional barriers to health equity in Queensland's public hospital and health services. This report has been transformational in the way Queensland Health now engages with its Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workforce, clients and with the community as a whole. The report has catalysed significant amendments to the Hospital and Health Boards Act and has created a precedent set by the Queensland Government on how to address institutional racism. It is anticipated that similar audits will be conducted across Queensland Government departments and agencies over the next few years. Basically, it is a tool for measuring government policy implementation and accountability. And I say this because there's a possibility in the near future that I'll be called down to Brisbane to address the DGs and DDGs in most of the Queensland Government departments about the matrix. And the matrix could actually be a a core tool in addressing institutional racism across all government agencies. And I suggest any government agency here should also take into account priority reform number 3 about transforming government agencies. That's probably a good point to stop. Thank you.